Welcome back to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. I am so glad you're here with me today. We're in for a treat. Today, I have the honor of talking with Mikaela Perry. Mikaela is a New York City-based visual artist. Through her paintings, Mikaela paints the stories of the land, farms, animals, and plants. She comes from a Northern Vermont farming family, 5 generations, stewards of the land and farming traditions. Farming is in her blood, and her deep appreciation for the land, animals, and plants continues today. Her beautiful life has taken her from rural to urban, from farming to public policy focused on agriculture and food systems, to art. Welcome, Mikaela. I am honored to be here with you today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Now, we have known each other for a little while. I'm going to tell everyone that you are my cousin's daughter.
hmm
And we reconnected, I don't know, was it 3 years ago? I've forgotten, 4 years ago.
hmm
You were in New York City and reached out to me through Instagram. And I just want to give a shout out to the world we live in is so small. And even though we have this family connection, our connection in the last 3 years is deeper than it was for your whole life.
hmm
Um, and I love the thought that this divine timing brings people and places together. And we get to be part of that. So I'm so honored to have you here with me today. And I can't wait for us to tell the world your story of your beautiful life. You ready to jump in with
I
me?
am ready. Yeah, where should we begin?
Well, I gave listeners that little snapshot of the journey that your life has taken, right? From farming to the city to food policy to art. Which one of those areas would you say you want to jump into? And what is beautiful about that path that you've taken?
It's hard to choose one area because they are all so intertwined. Each one has influenced the other. But I always, default to wanting to talk about my artwork because I think it's the more surprising part of my life. And it's, been the part of my life that has been my goal for a really long time. So I was born and raised on a farm, the same farm as Laurel mentioned, that's been in my family for generations, and had this really strong connection, not only to family members of past generations that I never met. I was literally surrounded by the beautiful things they had created and I was enjoying, 100 years later. Um, I had a very strong connection with the animals, especially horses. I felt my whole life as a kid like I understood horses more than people, and learned a lot about communication. And when I was in my early 20s, I had the opportunity to purchase the farm from my father, but couldn't afford it at the time. And I was headed to the Peace Corps to do agriculture work in rural Tanzania. Um, but before that happened, I was working on a farm in Southern California, and I had a very close friend. Shout out to Naomi Henry, who is also an artist. And I was feeling a pull to create arts, but I didn't even know where to start. As adults, I was a young adult, but even as adults, we're like, someone told us in grade school we weren't good at art or something, or we stopped even trying to create. And so we're just like, I'm not an artist. I don't know what to do. We do. We all know what to do. We all know how to create. And she had the tools. So she said, you can borrow some of my watercolors. And in that first painting I ever made as an adult, it was a hummingbird. It's on my mom's fridge. It was so bad, and I didn't know what I was doing. But I remember sitting there and something clicked inside of me for my identity. And I said, I am going to be an artist. I didn't know how. I didn't know why I had this thought, but it was like a deep knowing that's what I'm going to be. And that was 10 years ago.
And I
So,
love that because we often have these stories about what is important and what is valued. And we the universe has a different path for us, right? Our path is not what we think it is. And I remember, kind of watching, I'll say through social media, when you were in the Peace Corps and you started to paint with watercolors.
Mhm.
Right? You were really just, I'm going to call it playing, discovering, exploring. Um, and that is such a beautiful process, to be open to something, this longing or this nudge you get from the universe, that maybe there's something else there for you. So I love that. And thank you, Naomi, if you are listening. Thank you. The
I'll
world,
send it to her.
the world needs more artists who just discover that self-expression. So, I'm so curious about, now, you said, it's something you've wanted to do for a long time. 10 years is a long time. But in the last 10 years, you have done many more things, that included grad school, that included a high profile policy position. You were named on the in the 40 under 40 for in New York City food policy. Was it policy or
Yeah,
food
rising stars in
rising
food
stars?
policy.
Right? So you've had these other aspects that you have been pursuing. And so where was your art? Like, how did you manage both, when you were pursuing your MBA, right? Or it wasn't an MBA, I'm sorry, your master's, right, in food
Mhm.
policy. And I know you excelled in that arena as well. All right. Testifying before the New York legislature, the Senate, I know you exceed in that area as well. So where did this longing for art fit into all those other things that I'm going to say, were following, that also were contributions or longings of the heart? Where did it all fit, I guess?
Hmm. So I think both the public policy direction that I was headed in, and building a beautiful career in, that I am still very proud that I pursued,
You should be.
um, and my art practice have a very common thread. And that thread is I wanted to advocate about this moment in time that we're in, that not everyone realizes we're in. And that moment is that the average age of farmers is very high. Farmers are ready to retire, and there are not a lot of young farmers in a position to take that land over, like my own story, right? And I did try to purchase my family's farm back a few years ago, and I lost out to a cash offer. And that kind of fueled the fire, right? It's this feeling of like I can't return home, that many people throughout history have been displaced from the land. And I wanted to tell this story that, we think about that in like, when we were talking about like genocide or colonization, we think about large numbers of people being displaced from land. And I was hoping to find some empathy, in that there is this younger generation of people with knowledge of land stewardship that are feeling that displacement. And, you know, can they also have empathy that that's happened through history? So I wanted to both enter public policy so that I could advocate for policies that would keep younger farmers on the land and keep a secure food system. I mean, if we don't have farms, we don't have food. That's American Farmland Trust's like tagline, no farms, no food. And it's so true. And then with my artwork, I wanted to do more of the storytelling of what's my story? Why do I feel connection to these animals and the land? And through that first body of work and telling my own story and that feeling of loss and separation, um, found farmers who either have a similar story to me and couldn't afford land, um, or farmers who were able to transition onto their family's land or another piece of land and are currently making it work, and they are my age. And I want us to just think more about farming, especially
Yeah.
living in New York City. I guess so, the public policy route did that, and I was able to advocate and actually get policies passed at the state level that support farmers and make sure they can have viable businesses. And on the flip side, I really wanted folks in New York City to stop for a second and not only think about the people who are feeding them, but also what is their own connection to land? Because you can live here and feel very disconnected from your food system and the land that we're on. And I wanted folks to just have a moment to look at a painting and contemplate what their family's connection to land is. Where was that? And how does it show up in your identity and in your life? I wanted them to touch base with themselves as well.
You know, it reminds me a few years ago in one of our conversations, and we talked about you being in this very urban setting and really feeling disconnected from nature and the land. And I suggested that there's parks in New York City that you just go out to a park and walk barefoot in the park, put your feet in the grass. And your reaction was, but it's New York City.
My reaction is still that.
And I said, but it's grass, it's earth, right? There's something grounding and stabilizing about connection with the earth, right? And so I love that this is coming through for you. You know, can I ask for a minute? Because when I think about your life, it has been a series of bold moves, right? It's a bold move to go into the Peace Corps. It's a bold move to move across the country to California and work on a farm. It's a bold move. Your life has been a series of bold moves. And I remember when you were in your master's program and your final, I don't know what they call it, your final semester, when you asked, it was a bold move, you asked to do your final project as an art project. You asked permission to take I believe it was two art classes that weren't in the normal curriculum of a master's in food policy from NYU, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk about that just briefly about, you know, the courage that it took to forge your own path?
Yeah, for sure. That was probably one of my least bold moves.
Oh.
Let's not forget about the bold move where I shaved half my head.
Listen, that
asking to be in painting classes was,
shaving half your head is something. It might be a trend that people do. It's okay.
It was amazing. I loved it. If you're thinking about it, do it. So, yes, I think that having had that moment, you know, in my early 20s where I thought, okay, I'm going to be an artist. In the back of my mind, as the years progressed, I started to shift my thinking to how can I leverage the resources I have available to me right now to support that dream and make that happen? Because I am not waiting until retirement to learn how to paint well. You know, tomorrow is not given. We all know that, but I think it's very important to live that way. Tomorrow is not given. So I did not want to wait, you know, to develop my skills as an artist. So I think that through all of this, I was always thinking, how can I build those skills? How can I build that artist resume while also performing in the other areas of my life so that I can support myself in a very expensive city, build connections that might later, you know, be good connections for my art business. Policy and art are very similar in that they both depend on the quality of your relationships. And my most favorite thing in the world is building relationships and having, you know, deep conversations with people and learning about them. And I think as an artist, I'm very curious about people anyways, because I want to tell those stories. So that's really what drove that move. And, you know, you were coaching me at the time. And so you had me doing a lot of really nice inner work where I was thinking about what are the resources I have. I'm just going to shout out your coaching business because I feel like when I started working with you, I was tending towards quite negative thinking. And I just wanted to I wanted to get out of my situation. I didn't like New York City. I needed to get back to like farming. And I was frustrated that I couldn't support myself as an artist. And why did I go for a master's and not an MFA and all of these things? But rather reframing and thinking, I have a lot of different communities available to me right now. I have relationships in a world separate from art. So now I'm interesting because I step into these communities and I'm an artist and can bring those folks with me into the art world. And I'm at NYU and they have incredible painting courses. So why not, I can continue down a regular thesis path, but why not just see if they'd be willing to let me do my year-long thesis as an art exhibition? And they were. Why
Yeah.
not just ask? Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Why not just ask? And that when we talk about this, the inner work and creating our beautiful lives, it is for me, it's a little bit of self-exploration and then a lot of courage, right? Where we ask for what we want next, right? I mean, and I think about this in your path, in my path, in the paths of my clients, right? In Laurel's path. It really is, we have these moments in time where, when you read this in a fiction book or you watch it on a movie, it appears to be a crossroads, right? A big dilemma. But the crossroads that we come up against are just small, everyday acts of courage and asking for what you want, right? Knowing what you want. So, can you talk a little bit about the resources you had that allowed you to do the inner work, right? What did your inner, and I call it inner work. I know in our conversations before, you call it being in alignment, but what what was that menu of activities or resources that you had that helped you do this work while you were doing all of the other external work? You had some big things going on when we started working together.
Mm. I mean, I feel like I have been privileged to have a lot of resources available to me at every step of the way. Um, and I think sometimes I see when I'm in conversation with people asking how to achieve something that maybe I already have, how did you make that happen? And I think sometimes we can forget about the resources that are available to us. Things like, do I have $5 to buy a plain notebook to write down my thoughts? Most of us have smartphones. Do I have a smartphone and I can, while I'm out on my morning walk, record, if I don't like journaling, maybe I'm recording voice notes to myself to just get the thoughts that are spinning in my head out. I think that my number one tool in my toolkit, so to speak, is journaling. And just so much magic has happened in my life for writing down, okay, next I really want this. I'm really thinking about this. This is my next goal. And once you like put that out there, we can call it manifestation, scientifically speaking, because let's put the science behind it for those who aren't into like spiritual
That's
manifesting
right.
like
Who don't
me.
believe in the universe as much as we do.
Right. I personally write to the universe, but scientifically, when you're writing something down or speaking it out loud, you start to change your behaviors to work toward that thing. But, accomplishing a goal does take, action. So don't underestimate the power of journaling or writing, speaking out voice notes to yourself, taking a walk, anything that can get you in flow. Sometimes splashing water on your face, being in water, being near a body of water. These are like, for most of us, for a lot of us, fairly low cost options to
Yes.
just get yourself in a more optimistic headspace, working out, exercising, going for a run, a walk, whatever it is. And then other resources, I would say the biggest one is who's in your network, you know? And I don't mean like formal networking, which can, to me, I cringe when I hear about networking, I'm like, oh, but the truth is, technically you can always be networking as long as you're making friends or maintaining your relationships with friends. What communities do you have access to? Have you ever had an in-depth conversation with your neighbor? What do they do? Several neighbors who you might meet in the grocery store or,
In the park, putting
go
their
out to dinner with a friend's friend.
that's right. Or in the
So,
park while they're sitting there with their bare feet in the grass, you might be like,
right.
what are you
But
doing?
if you're in New York City, just look at the area for, feces. But
Right. Or broken glass or whatever it is.
right.
Right.
I
Of
can't
course.
tell you to take off your shoes until you search the area. Yeah, so I would say that like these are fairly accessible ways to build resources out for
Yeah.
yourself.
And then I have a follow-up question for you because you had a full life, right? In school, working full time, yet you still, and doing your art, you still found time for self-reflection or some, I'll call them self-care practices. I mean, we call them often tools in your toolbox, right? But how did you make time for that? How did you find time for that? And you live with another human being and a puppy. So you not just a full life, but you are in a close proximity of the people and the dog person too that you live with, right? And so how do you prioritize that? The work that you want to do or that you're being drawn to do.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, it's so funny because last night I like found this post on Instagram about how like something about like the quantum universe exists, and you know this because um people ask you all the time, how do you find time to do these things? And you actually don't know. So when you're working on something that's really in alignment with your higher purpose, I do think time kind of expands for you when you hit that flow. But again, let's come back to reality for
No,
a second.
I love that answer because you know what we can go to the science of flow. Now I don't know a lot about this science, but there are books written about the flow state and there's science behind it that when we get into flow or a flow state, we really can slow down time,
Yeah,
right? And I'm going to say in my own experience, it also calms my nervous system when I'm in flow. I might be working, and being busy. But if I'm in flow, I'm calm and I'm in a state of ease and grace, right? So I love this thought of it's not just in the quantum world, the universe that this
yeah,
happens, but there are ways that we can slow ourselves down in order to focus on the things we want to focus.
right. I
Yeah.
do think that time opens up in your schedule when it's not it's not necessarily enough to have a goal. You have to align that goal with your identity, and then it becomes a purpose. And so, the time for my artwork has always been a priority because I have been identifying as an artist. It's the same if you have like a health or wellness goal, until you maybe identify as I'm someone who is an athlete or is really healthy or physically well, and you really embody that identity, then you'll start to make progress on your goals or open up time to achieve those goals because it's a part of your identity. There has to be like that purpose and why behind it. And I do think for me, time has opened up for my artwork as I've really stepped into this is who I am. And then the other parts of your life start to become a little smaller. But as you feed yourself, whatever it is that feeds you, nourishes you, and is in alignment with your greater purpose, in my experience, you also start to show up with a lot more love in your relationships, in your home life, at work. You can just show up as that full human that you are.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So I want to ask, can you recall any instance or a turning point in your life when you started to put more attention on your inward focus, your inner self, and that self reflection? Did anything come to mind?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I started journaling when I was about 20. And I think if I recall, it was like a breakup that spurred this actually.
Heartbreak. Yes. Heartbreak
And
often
now,
leads us.
now I hardly remember who that was, or, I'm like, why was I sad? But that young heartbreak did, propel me into this like lifetime of religiously journaling and starting to learn more about myself. And then there was another event later on where one of my closest friends um, passed away very unexpectedly. And this was 2019.
Oh,
So
yeah.
one of my great grandmother passed away, your grandmother.
That's right. By the way,
Um,
she was 99 and a half.
and a legend.
A legend. We come from a family somewhere in our DNA, Mikaela, are strong, vibrant, independent, annoying at times women.
We could do a whole episode just on life lessons we learned from her.
Yes. And I'm going to speak her name. She was my grandmother and Michaela's great grandmother. Anita Folsom was her name. And she was amazing. We all learned a lot from her. Yes.
Yeah.
Keep going. Let's go back to your beautiful life.
So, yes, so she passed away. And then shortly thereafter, one of my very close friends, who was in her late 20s, passed away while serving for the US government overseas, not in the army.
Yes.
But, anyways, so then I was, in a relationship that was giving me a lot of turmoil. There were a lot of issues, and I was in a job that was not in alignment with my higher purpose, and just really struggling with all of that, grief, bad relationship. My anxiety was through the roof. And at that point, I had several of my closest friends say, "Have you considered therapy?" And thank God. So I started therapy, and that was so wonderful and helpful. And I always recommend if folks can access therapy. And here's another example of asking for what you need. I couldn't afford the rates. And I think a lot of people are deterred from therapy because of the cost. And I told this therapist, I cannot afford to pay you that. Here's what I think. I think I was paying like $30 a session. And he said, it's okay. And we stayed on for 3 years.
Wow.
So just again, like asking for what you need, someone will support you in that.
Yes.
You have more resources than you think. You just have to ask.
Yes.
So, and then a couple years later, I started working with you.
That's right. And I want to just say that, you talk about something not being in alignment with your higher path, your higher self. I want you to tell our listeners, how do you know when you're not in alignment? How does this wisdom and intelligence from something bigger come through for you?
For me, on the emotion side, there, we have emotions that tend to feel more negative to us, and then there are the more like positive emotions. For me, those more negative leaning emotions are like jealousy, anger, at times rage, sadness. If I'm crying a lot, something's not right. So paying attention to that, how much of your day is spent kind of sitting in these more negative emotions, and then, if you're trying to move out of them, if this is a daily occurrence and you're trying to move out of them, you're moving your body, you're dancing, you're talking to friends, you're talking to someone, you're journaling, whatever it is that works for you, and you're still sitting in those more negative emotions, something might need to shift. Jealousy is actually my favorite indicator that I like something, I'm longing for something. So that's a fun one. But then also I try to pay very close attention to my um, the physical things that are happening in my body. So, am I getting a lot of migraines? I get headaches and migraines if something's not right. Um, am I not breathing very deeply? Am I feeling really lethargic, or am I not sleeping enough at night? These are all signs, even if like all your blood work, go to a doctor. But if all of your like blood work and everything is normal, you look otherwise healthy, something's probably, your body is telling you something. And I think it's very important to listen to that.
And I'm so glad that you talked about this because, I think about it, talking about feeling, emotions and whether we judge them as negative or positive, right? Um, when I was doing my yoga training and the Buddhist philosophy of everything is neutral, it is I who gives it a negative or positive
Right.
spin, right? And so often in my coaching, I talk to people about feeling all of the emotions, right? Because the importance of crying when you're sad or being
Mhm.
angry when you're angry, right? Even letting rage be is so that we don't hold it in our body. Because
Right.
it's not the energy, it's not the emotion that scares me. It's the energy of the emotion that when we put it in our body, it shows up in, it's disease. It's lack of ease in your physical being, right? And it shows up in, I mean, I too suffered from migraines daily, for a long time, right? I haven't had a headache in, I don't know, a couple years, right? And so when we think about what are those messengers from our body, um, I do this now. I'm going to be 62 at my next birthday, and my right hip is more cranky than it's been. But I know I hold emotion in my right hip. The first time I had a hip problem, I was in seventh grade. So it's not that I'm 62 that is causing my hip to be cranky. It's whatever I'm storing in my hip. And so now my practice is physically connecting with that, putting my hand on that part of my body and asking, what is it I need to know? What
Mhm.
emotion am I storing there, right? But having a way to process those emotions is so important because our body has wisdom. And if we're not connected, if we're disassociated with our body because we're so much in our head and thinking, we lose a lot of wisdom. And I'm so pleased to hear you say that. Um, and I remember when we were working together and I gave you an assignment because you were not feeling at home, right? In your body, in your physical surroundings, in this urban setting. And I remember giving you an assignment to dance in your living
Mhm.
room for 5 minutes a night with your partner. And you thought I was crazy. But that physical movement, it brought some joy and fun and lightness back to you. So I think you really, I can't wait to go back and listen to all the things you just told me and our listeners about the practices and how you know when you're not in alignment and what you can do that doesn't, dancing in your living room for 5 minutes doesn't cost anything, right? Even I remember a time when it's like you can be in nature when it's on YouTube in your, on the screen, right? You can be in the rainforest watching, listening to the sounds of birds, right? Like just
It's
because you're in an urban setting, you have access to so many resources.
Yeah. And now I know so much about orcas. And like I'm proud of it. I just want to say like it's so funny to hear you say that I thought you were crazy because I'm like ready to deny it. I'm like me. I have like hour-long dance parties in my living room now, and I do walk barefoot in the New York City grass. And
There's-
I listen to bird sounds on my walk through my headphones in the morning when I'm really
yeah,
anxious.
yeah.
And it's easy to think this stuff is like, oh, it's such a waste of time, but it's never a waste of time to calm your nervous system. You can't you can't live in your purpose and enjoy your life if you're in fight or flight or freeze mode all the time. And most of the time I still am, but now I have awareness there and know how to, bring it back down. And I just encourage folks, like if are resistant to these activities, maybe give them a try because why not enjoy your life while you're trying to figure that out?
That's right. Yeah. So we're going to wrap up soon, but there's so many things. We're going to take a few more minutes because we have not even gotten into identity and planning your life, right? So I mean, I am a woman who did this from a very young age. I had my whole life planned in front of me, and some of my biggest challenges were when life didn't go as planned, right? And I've luckily made peace with all of those things and can look back and see those events, those nudges from the universe, as I call them, those forced actions that weren't my forcing. Um, led me to exactly where I'm supposed to be, right?
Mhm.
And in that process, I had to allow my identity and my ego. I had to let go of it. And I've been reading about this a bit lately, that it's, surrender. When we hear about surrendering, it's not that we're giving up, it's that we're letting go of our tight grasp on a situation. We're allowing. So I want to hear a little bit about your experience as you've done this work. Um, how have you managed identity and ego?
Well, I am in the throes of managing that right now.
Yay.
Um, so I have worked very hard throughout the past decade while I was also, learning my art skills. In my career, I was getting that degree, and I did finally get what I believed was my dream job. I mean, it was my dream job, which was to be a policy manager with the American Farmland Trust. And for those who aren't familiar with AFT, the mission of the organization is to keep farmers on the land and to help them, you know, uh, farm with climate smart practices and to have viable farm businesses. It is so aligned with everything I stand for as a person. And so I love that organization and am proud to have worked there for 5 years and advocate for them at the state level in New York State. So during this role, Laurel mentioned I was testifying, drafting legislation, leading statewide coalitions with, hundreds of partners who would come together and advocate for things with me leading them, in that direction and building those relationships. And we got amazing policies passed that will benefit so many New Yorkers, not just farmers, but communities as well. And this week, I actually, a few days ago, handed in my resignation so that I can pursue my art business. And I thought I would, when the day came that I felt finally ready to pursue my art business full time, I would just feel elated. And actually, what I have felt this week is anxiety and I think grief. And that comes from, my identity is so wrapped up in the mission of this organization. Um, I share the organization's values and also have been so lucky over the past 5 years to work with the most incredible people. Like when I tell you, my coworkers they are so incredible. And so, I'm still there for another month. I don't know when this podcast will air, but I'm now in the process of letting people know and saying goodbye. And it's heartbreaking. And on top of all of that, I am so surprised, back to identity and ego, that the thoughts I'm having are like, oh, I'm going to be so sad in February when everyone else is testifying in front of the legislature at the environmental conservation hearing. And like, will I regret not being there? And, like, oh, you're not going to be important anymore because you're not going to be advocating for policy in New York State and like lobbying Governor Hochul's office and like all of these things. That is all ego, and it is important work, and someone else can do it. Because right now, I need to focus on the paintings that are living in my head that will tell the individual stories of farmers and the land. And I just feel that I need to follow that. But it is so hard. And I am just trying to, unravel my identity a bit from that very specific job and just letting the emotions happen this week.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I mean, I've been out of the corporate world for almost 6 years. And I just had a situation come up last week where I was invited to be on the board of directors for an organization that I am proud to be a member of. And it brings me back into it's New England Women in Energy and the Environment. And I've been involved in this organization in some capacity since probably 2009. I worked in the energy industry, all of those. I worked in environmental. And when I was asked, I could see my ego, taking on a life of its own. And it showed up in the thoughts I was having about the opportunity. And I really had to pull that ego. I could see it. So I had to pull her back in. And she is a her, right? She's part of me. Had to pull her back in and really ground myself in my values, right? Get into alignment with, does this opportunity align with my values? And I have three top values, and my requirement for when something's in alignment, it can't be in alignment with only one. It has to meet all three or it's a no. And so it was really healthy for me to have these practices and having done this inner work so that I could see the ego and benefit from the ego, right? It's a messenger, but make heart-based decisions that I know are meant for me rather than just chasing every opportunity that my ego thinks is going to be fun and great, right?
Mhm.
So I love that. And then the identity piece, it's easy for us to look back over a lifetime and see how our identity has changed. But when we are in the throes of an identity growth opportunity, I don't even want to call it an identity shift or crisis. It really is an expansion of our identity. It's, for me, it's not either or, it's and both, right? And so you, you are a policy person and an artist, right? And there's nothing wrong with the policy manager in you showing up on the canvas, right? That you can still be both, right? You can still advocate in your own way. And I love that. I love that. And because often our identity keeps us in the doing of things that are no longer meant for us,
Mhm.
right? Like it is hard to admit that we are not the screenplay writer of this screenplay. Our life unfolds exactly as it's supposed to. And I love
Yeah.
that you are seeing all of that. So
Thank
good.
you.
Now, I just want to leave you with one thought about this transition for you from American Farmland Trust and the important work you're doing with the New York legislature advocating for farmers. You will no longer be woken up at midnight with a text on your phone from a senator, ever. You won't be exhausted, during budget season at the end of the legislative cycle, right? Um, and you have just modeled for someone else how a successful policy manager can navigate that demanding and important work. So I'm going to say, congratulations, you have done what you needed to do in that role. And I can't wait to see what comes next for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much,
Yeah.
Laurel.
Anything last, one more tip, anything you want to leave our listeners with? I know we want to give them all of your contact information. We will put your website, your contact information, and whatever else you want will be in the show notes.
Great.
Anything else that you want to bring for our listeners today?
The last tip I have is for myself, and maybe it will resonate with someone, which is just, it can feel really overwhelming when you were on a certain life path and then decided, made a decision to switch, but the decision, it will not be clear when you should make that decision. So you actually have to decide, which path in life do I want to take? And that is your decision to make. And that is the bold move. And the bold move, the path may not be clear because it is your path alone and no one else has ever walked it and no one else probably ever will. So, don't be scared of that. You don't let the safety of the path you were on deter you from making that bold choice.
That is such wisdom from such a young woman, Mikaela Perry. Thank you. It has been such a pleasure to be with you in this time.
Same.
Yeah.
And then, if anyone listening needs some artwork, you need an artist in your life, you can find me on my website or follow my Instagram for like insider looks at the process, the painting process. and I'm open for commissions, custom paintings, and I have workshops. So if you're not interested in collecting art, but you are interested in, my process of becoming an artist and you're like, hey, I want to also try my hand at painting. I have workshops and openings for private one-on-one lessons
Mm,
online.
that is such a wonderful offer. Creative rest is one of the 7 types of rest. And you and I have talked about this, but creative rest is so important. And creative rest can be anything that has you in the environment that kind of feeds your creativity, right? So it could be learning art, it could be practicing art, it could be just looking at art, owning art, right? Creating your beautiful creative surroundings. So I have a few of your pieces in
You
my
do.
home. I do.
Laurel's a collector.
If 2 is a collection, then I have 2. Oh, well,
It is.
I have more than 2 actually, because you did a beautiful painting when you were here. Mikaela was with me last year over some vacation days, did a beautiful painting of my family's beach house, which now is, I'm going to say that 4-generation beach home, lots of memories and energy here, and you captured it in a beautiful little painting. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again. This is a lovely conversation, and I really watching your beautiful life unfold and the bold moves that you've been making every step of the way. It's just delightful for me.
Thanks so much, Laurel.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Well, that is it for now. Another episode of Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life, and we will be back soon for more. Every Monday, there's a new episode, and once a month, we are bringing an interview to introduce you to someone who has a beautiful life for all of their own unique reasons. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Bye for now.